Welcome to On Scene with RCSO. I'm your host, Lieutenant Kimberly Lee, and I am with Sergeant Amos. Welcome.
Good to be here. Thank you for having me.
I have been excited and ready for you to be on the show for a while. So, kind of tell us about yourself, who you are, and what division you work for.
Randall Amos, Sergeant in Violent Crimes, assigned to Special Investigations and the Cold Case Division. Work on homicides, the violent crimes, aggravated assaults. We try to piece together when we have particular suspects, bringing all the cases together and getting other investigators together to make sure we make the arrest on bigger cases, things like that.
Mm-hmm. And you're on the show today because and we had already talked to the viewers and the listeners kind of about the format of the show. We want to make people aware of, what we have to offer here at the Sheriff's Office, some of the programs that they may not know about. But also we told them that ever so many shows, we're going to highlight a cold case. So that's why I'm kind of excited to have you here because we've talked about how hard it is. As you or whoever else that comes up and picks up a cold case, how difficult those can be because you're kind of starting from scratch on something that some other people have worked on. In this case that we're going to talk about today, it happened in 2010 here in Richmond County. So just, for the record, our cold cases, and if I get this wrong, let me know, after 30 days and there's no activity on it, it is determined to be a cold case. Is that correct, or is it kind of a little more difficult than that? Or
It depends on just every case is different.
Mm-hmm.
There at any time leads can come in and we can reopen a case and look into it. There's a whole slew of reasons as to why a case may either go cold or can be brought back up. But typically after a certain amount of time, like I said, it will go into the cold case side of things. And then whenever something comes up, we'll revisit the case and look into what the new information leads us into.
Okay. And in reading the case notes, just trying to prepare for this one, there was a lot of work in the beginning. Which usually happens with homicides. This is a homicide cold case. We do know other cases can go cold, sexual assaults, missing persons, but mostly when you think about cold cases, they're homicides. And there was a lot of work in the beginning and throughout, and then at some point it just kind of stopped. But in this case, which I didn't even know about, I tell the listeners and viewers all the time, I'm from Richmond County. I live in Richmond County. But this happened in 2010, and I was certainly here, but I don't remember it at all. So we have the victims, Nancy Cushman, she was 17 years old at the time, and Angela Brooks, who was 19 years old at the time. And their bodies were found on November 25th, 2010. And that's a pretty significant day in 2010. So kind of tell us about the case.
Well, that was a Thanksgiving Day back in 2010. It was a Thursday. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning. There was a citizen walking there's an area near Twiggs and Laney Walker where citizens will cut through kind of the dirt, grassy area. Someone had found two people there, later identified as Nancy Cushman and Angela Brooks. They contacted the sheriff's office, and it's around 2 o'clock in the morning that deputies would locate Angela and Nancy there in the dirt area near the railroad tracks. The investigation, fortunately, as far as evidence goes, deputies quickly found a vehicle that was associated with Nancy and Angela that was found at 2nd and Telfair near the East Boundary area. It was clear that this vehicle was associated with Nancy and Angela. That was taken to the sheriff's office for processing. Crime scene came out, did their thing, and we quickly learned that both Nancy and Angela were shot multiple times. So this being 2 o'clock in the morning and being a double homicide, multiple investigators were called in, like I said, on Thanksgiving Day, 2 o'clock in the morning, and lots of things were being processed. One of the early developments as far as a person of interest in this case was a young man called Travis Berrien. We had found out, I say we, the investigators at the time, I wasn't here in 2010, but investigators quickly found out that Travis Berrien had been dating one of the girls. Ultimately would interview Travis Berrien early on in the investigation. Some of his statements just didn't line up, but at the time there wasn't enough to say that he definitively was the person that did this or that. They're just, your story isn't making sense.
And I know just kind of leading up to, and when they're investigating homicides, of course, you see the TV shows like, First 48 and stuff like that. Very early on, soon after the Angela and Nancy were found, it wasn't, like you said, too long ago, their vehicle was located. And their vehicle, just looking through the case file and things, it was a pretty known vehicle in the area to where they were also found. It was the color. I believe if I would have seen it, it would have been like, oh, yeah, I've seen that vehicle. Lots of people, lots of witnesses came forward to say, look, I saw that vehicle in the area, in the same area where they were located the day before, or at least a couple of days before, and also on the day that they were that they were found in that cut area. So it was a Ford Explorer, or do you remember the vehicle?
I believe it was, the year might be wrong off the top of my head, but I believe it was a 99 Cadillac Escalade, and described a couple different ways, but it was very distinct. Some described it as a dark orange, brown also is kind of the color, but the distinct feature for this vehicle was the yellow stripes on the vehicle. It's after looking through the interviews that investigators had done, it was very clear that, hey, people had seen Angela and Nancy in this car. I'm not sure there was another car like it in the area. They knew that this car was associated with Angela and Nancy.
And also, it was Nancy's vehicle. But Angela, everybody would say that Angela was the one who would drive Nancy around, or if they saw someone, it would be normally Angela driving the car. And it was also spotted in South Carolina too. I believe they have addresses actually in South Carolina. So South Carolina was familiar with them. Investigators went across the bridge to those places to where they knew that they were spotted, talked to folks. And the day before, there was video that was put out at the time of them at Smart Grocery. As we know, sometimes with cold cases, places aren't the same. They didn't look the same in 2010 maybe as in here now, but Smart Grocery is still there. Where they were found, that cut is probably still being walked multiple times. It was a pretty known area. So those places are still there and they still kind of stand. But after that video was released, because they do know that there were some subjects in that car with them, at least at Smart Grocery, and the calls, it looked like, start pouring in about, either they knew them or they saw them or they knew somebody who was in the vehicle with them. And I believe the two subjects that they called about that was in that vehicle at Smart Grocery, investigators talked to them too.
That's correct. There's at least one press release that I'm familiar with, and that Richmond County did in reference to releasing photos of the vehicle and then trying to identify those two subjects. Ultimately, they were identified and they were interviewed here at the sheriff's office and ultimately released. And we were able, investigators were able to obtain additional information just kind of through those interviews about the events of the day, trying to kind of close in the gap of the entire story of those last couple hours.
And it sounds like they were kind of just driving around. And maybe they had visited some friends or relatives in that area, and some places that they were staying. But people, like I said, saw them up until about maybe early that next morning, which would have been on the 25th, because like we said already, they were seen at about 2 o'clock Thursday or Thanksgiving morning. So there's a huge, trail of, where they could have been or who they could have picked up and things like that. So when I was reading the notes, like I said, there are people who would call and say, hey, I heard this. And investigators followed up. It looks like they followed up on every telephone call they received. They interviewed every witness that called, either in person or over the telephone. And the frustrating part, and you talked about the kind of main person of interest, who is Travis Berrien, and investigators spoke to him. They actually talked to him more than one time. But that person, Mr. Berrien, is no longer alive. He is deceased now. So whatever information that he may have had, or if he was one of the subjects that was responsible for Angela and Nancy's death, that has now gone cold, and whatever information that he may have had has gone with him, which is one of the issues that we have when we talk about picking up a cold case. And also, I'm aware that there was another person that investigators wanted to talk to. That person is now deceased. So whatever information they may have had, that may be gone. So is there anything new? Because that's when this case was actually, and we're talking about these investigators worked it from Thanksgiving morning until the last notes that I read was July of 2011. So they did a lot of work on this case. Everything that could have been processed from the vehicle or from the scene was processed. They were able to eliminate some persons of interest. They were able to just kind of some of the evidence they found, process that. Is there anything new since you were able to pick it up? Can you tell us how this came out of that cold case stack?
So I first got involved, I was hired back in 2013, so I wasn't here when the actual incident took place. I believe it was February of 2020 is when I first got a call. There was a family member that had, it's hearsay upon hearsay, but they had heard something that someone had mentioned that they might have had some information in reference to this case. Follow the rabbit hole down to, this person to that person. Eventually, the individual that they had brought up, we have been able to talk to them. Unfortunately, it hasn't turned out to be what we want. But through picking up the case and seeing what the investigators have done from day one on this case, like you said, everything has been processed, between DNA, fingerprints, phone records. One of the things that has advanced this case and that has brought a new name up is the advancements in the database for our fingerprints. Okay. It's expanded and increased and has, as time goes by, people get arrested or people put their fingerprints into this database, and they can come up at any time for any reason. And one of the benefits of the good sides of a cold case, you never want anything to go this long, unfortunately, but one of the good positive sides is that there is always new information coming in. New fingerprints, there's new arrests, DNA's put on file. And one of the advancements in this particular case is that the fingerprints that were collected by investigators during the initial investigation from some of the areas that evidence was collected has developed into a new name, and there's things that we've been able to follow up and continue to rule people out. So, works both ways in regards to that.
Yeah, and ruling people out is important because we want to find the person or persons responsible for this. So any evidence that was collected, like I said, they were able to rule people out pretty quickly through evidence. Some is just kind of sitting there. But, you want to get the right persons responsible for this because it's one thing to arrest someone, and I say it all the time. We can make the arrest, but that's not the end of the story. The end of the story is the conviction. And that's what's kind of hard about these cases when people don't come forward or people hold information because they have the belief that, well, maybe it's already solved, or maybe they don't even know that this case is already open. And some people, and I will say that just looking at, because my favorite thing is crime shows and things like that, real life documentaries and crime shows. Some people have already been arrested and they're serving time for something else. And people believe like, oh, I thought he was already arrested for that. Or, oh, they're already arrested for that, so it doesn't even matter. So things like the DNA advancements and able to, everybody who goes to prison or whatever, they give a DNA sample, and sometimes those hits do come back for, something that happened 20 years ago or 10 years ago. So this is just, again, we say it all the time. If you have any information, we know it happened in 2010, and we will be bringing out, just the vehicle. So if people, go and recognize the vehicle or these names, we don't want them to disappear. We want to bring life to these names. We want to bring closure to these families. We're talking about a 17 and a 19-year-old on Thanksgiving Day. That's the day where you're getting ready to congregate with your family, to have that time to appreciate each other. And these two families, they had the opposite of what they should have had on Thanksgiving Day. So I'm sure every Thanksgiving, it's not, the memories for them is totally different from what it could be for me or you that have, our family still there. Or, if we do have loved ones that are gone, it's not in this way. Their cause of death, there was an autopsy, and their cause of death was ruled to be a homicide. So we do know that this is, there was foul play involved in these two ladies. And we're talking about they were found away from their vehicles. They were found in a path that is frequent by people who walk that area all the time. So it wasn't a place where it was desolate. And also, there were people that were there at their last moments that saw them alive, that were responsible for their death this morning. So, or on that morning in 2010. So, is there anything that you feel like you need the listeners and the viewers to know, or what would you say to them, being the cold case investigator?
Something that you had hit on already, as far as people think, when an arrest is made. In the course of this investigation, there were arrests made as far as, whether it's a narcotics charge or a weapons charge, but it's not the people responsible for the murder of Nancy Cushman and Angela Brooks. And you're right, people will assume that, oh, they already got them. What they get them for, they don't know that. One thing that I've found in any cold case and a lot of investigations is that people will make those assumptions when an arrest is made, but there's also a lot of people that are, for one reason or another, they'll say that, well, the police never came and spoke to me. Sometimes that does happen. There was an extremely large amount of work done in this particular case, but there's always the possibility that someone knows something. And we always encourage, if you have a millisecond that you think, hey, I should pass this along to law enforcement, we encourage you to call. because you may not think it's important. It may be the missing piece of the puzzle. And I know some people will hold on to information. Sometimes it's out of fear until maybe they can move out of the area or they get to a place that's safe. Or unfortunately, there are some people that hold on to information as negotiating tools when they get arrested for the crimes that they have committed. And I hate to think that people are like that, but that is just the way that it is sometimes. So if anyone has any information, and even people that we have interviewed before, I encourage them to reach back out if there's something that, when I first spoke with whichever investigator I spoke with at the time, reach back out and say, hey, look, if there's something I forgot to mention, don't assume that someone else is going to provide the information, because you may be the only one with it. A lot of times it may not pan out to anything, but it may be the part that we need to bring justice for these young ladies or anyone else, and closure for families.
Yes. And everybody interviews different too. Information that you may elicit from a witness may be something totally different that I may get. So it's just talking to somebody different. A lot of times you may get new information, because a lot of people, if they do talk to you, they'll say, well, you didn't ask me that. So that may be something that they're holding. So if they interviewed you, if you have any information on the murder of Angela Brooks and Nancy Cushman, please give us a call here at the Richmond County Sheriff's Office. You can ask for Sergeant Amos directly, or you can ask for any on-call Richmond County Sheriff's Office investigator, a violent crime investigator, and someone will get in contact with you. If you have not watched or liked or shared any other episode, please, this is one that's important to at least share, because we know people move out of the area. People, they're not aware that this case may be still open. So we want to put it out there. We want to let people know that, this is not the only one, but this is one of many cases that have gone cold that we are ready to, and we need to put a closure for these victims, 17 and 19-year-old, and their families. So is there anything else you would like to add to that?
No, I think that's pretty much it.
Okay.
Like I said, I just encourage people to, if they feel like they need to reach back out, please do.
Okay. Thank you for coming on this episode. We will definitely see you again when we highlight our next cold case. And hopefully when we come back, we'll have some type of update on this one. So thank you for tuning in to On Scene with RCSO. We will see you next time.